What is up, guys? Welcome back to the Kick-Ass Podcast. We are here today to take a look at episode 3 of Who Killed WCW. Episode 3 is titled New Blood. Of course, we'll be picking up where we left off on last week's episode, episode 2. And this week we'll be focusing on a new edition, playing off the New Blood, obviously, with Vince Russo. And I was if you watched my last episode, very excited to see what Russo was going to say, the inclusion of him, if we're going to get any comments. I've noticed with how in Dark Side of the Ring would do it as well. They will have certain clips, right? They'll have Vince Russo saying something and making either an accusation or a claim or whatever the case, or even if you were just to say this guy is blue, right? And he would say something like, "Oh, the sky is blue," and I was talking with Eric Bischoff, and he said the sky is purple or whatever it is. Then production would take that clip of Vince Russo saying whatever it is and show it to Eric Bischoff, and then Eric Bischoff would respond. So I really like that. I really like when production teams and shows are able to do that, just depending on when they're doing the filming and the recording for obviously the respective parties involved. But we got a little bit of that in this as well. So I'm very excited to go over that episode and just kind of take a look at it. And this was pretty much a pivotal moment in WCW as well. Kind of stemming off of the ending of episode 2 where Eric Bischoff was fired, and then the introduction, like we were saying, with Vince Russo and the New Blood angle and just the various creative decisions that were made. And that some say maybe expedited the death of WCW. But to me, like I've said before, if you've listened to any of the other prior episodes, I think it was an accumulation of things. But we're going to get into all that. Just want to always start off by saying thank you so much for checking out the show. If you're new here, thank you so much for checking it out. If you are returning, I appreciate you as well. Feel free to like, subscribe, download wherever is easiest for you. I always wonder with other content creators, what's the easiest and the best way to give them credit, and to give them views, right? I've recently started with this YouTube route, which seems to be a little bit easier just for downloading and kind of transmitting the audio to other platforms to get it out to Apple and Spotify and things like that via StreamYard. But I've always wondered, like with some of the bigger YouTube channels, right, if they prefer you to view on and to stream it on YouTube to help their YouTube views, or if they prefer you to listen to it on Apple. So yeah, I don't know. It was just a thought that I've always had, and while I was just thinking, you guys, it made me wonder. So if any of you guys are out there and you're watching my little channel here, feel free to leave it in the comments, or just whatever you prefer watching. If you prefer watching on YouTube, or if you prefer listening on Apple or Spotify or wherever else you listen to, let me know. Let me know what you guys prefer, and if you prefer a visual or just the audio. I'm kind of a little bit of both, depending on what the topic is on and the length of it and things like that. But long story short, as always, I just want to say thank you guys for just viewing and checking out wherever you're doing it. I truly appreciate it. I welcome all feedback, comments, whatever you feel. No judgment here, and no light feelings or anything like that. I'm grown, you know what I mean? As long as there's nothing like too like disparaging or anything like that, like you pretty much won't get any crying over here from me, because I like constructive criticism, you know what I mean? Like that's how we all grow, I feel. But feel free to follow the show on Twitter at kickashpodcast_. You can follow me on Twitter at ASHMANNS, and like I said, you can watch the show on YouTube, or you can listen wherever you are doing so. But with all that, I'm going to dive right into. Again, this is episode 3 of Who Killed WCW. The title for episode 3 is New Blood. And getting into the recap here, I want to send huge praise and thanks and all the goodness, all the good kudos, all the good vibes out to 411mania.com. Again, the author is Robert Leidy Jr., and I hope I'm pronouncing your last name correctly, sir. But he has been doing all the pretty detailed recaps and rundowns of the episodes here, and I've just been very impressed with just the article formation and the layout of everything and how he groups it, and just the synchronization of it, and I like the website as well, the 401 Mania. Just the layout of everything. You're not smacked in the face with ads. Like, yes, there's a few, but it's not like, oh, like every time you even touch the page, you're getting attacked by an ad. So shout out to them. I will again put the link in the show notes here. So I just always want to give props and shout out to where I'm reading it from, because like I've said in the past, if you listen to me or if you have not, I am terrible at focusing on a TV show or an event in general and taking like detailed notes like that. Like I have to be involved. So shout out and props to all the journalists out there who can do what I cannot do. But getting into the show here, like we stated, we are picking up obviously where episode 2 left off, which was with Eric Bischoff being fired and sent home from WCW. He went home to his wife. The next day, flew out to Wyoming and I think went fishing. And they ended up calling in Vince Russo. So we get a little bit of backstory on Russo as well. But it starts off in the year 1999, obviously, with Brad Siegel. And again, I love the inclusion of the key characters and not even characters, but the key individuals in WCW and in Turner as well that they were able to score for this. So props to them and whatever money they had to pay out to get the guys and all the, like I said, the key components, like a Turner executive. Like I'm just very surprised. It was this one, they got Teddy Turner. So just shout out to them, and it really added to the I would say the validation and the real just integrity of the show. I guess that's the word I'm looking for. So yeah, it's just I appreciate that, and not just like random people that, oh yeah, like I was in WCW, but I was in like like whatever, like you really didn't have a prominent role. These people were actually executives and had actual prominent roles and were decision makers and who had a hand in what was going on. So that really makes or breaks a show, in my opinion, especially in a documentary style like this. But moving back to the actual content, again, we're in 1999. Brad Siegel says WCW was one of many things he was responsible for, and it was the thing he liked the least. He notes Eric was the glue that held things together and was fired, so he had to run WCW and he didn't want to. Which I was right off there. I appreciate his honesty, you know what I mean? And I appreciated his bluntness there because it probably isn't a popular thing, like in the wrestling world to hear that the person who's now taking over doesn't even want to be doing it. So yes, obviously in regards to a company that's no longer around and things are changed or have changed, but I just appreciate the honesty. Bill Bush was put in place as an interim and was the acting COO. Guy Evans notes that Bush's first major move was picking up Vince Russo, and then they have in parentheses here, and Ed Ferrero, though that was not mentioned in the show there. So good call out there. Brett, my guy Brett, says he got the call and was told that he got the call and was told that Russo was a genius. And then we're checking in with The Rock, who remembers that Russo was leaving for WCW and he thought it was great for Russo, but it's pro wrestling and shit like this happens all the time. DDP says he was excited when he heard Russo was coming, and Conan agrees. Booker heard that Russo was a genius as well. So pretty much just checking in with the other key players that are involved here as well. Again, it just cracks me up when we see The Rock there. It's just so, in a lot of ways I get it, but in a lot of ways it's still just so random to me that you just hear talking to all these like key WCW guys and executives and all this shit, and then you just have The Rock there. Which again, like in one hand, I get it. Key figure in the other company, a very cool perspective and insight into the opposition, but just I don't know. I don't know. It just doesn't fit in with all the other panels guests. I guess if we want to call it that. But yeah, so pretty much they're just checking in with everyone. Obviously, the general consensus was that Vince Russo was a genius, and everyone was pretty much like, okay, they're excited that they're getting Russo, and most of them thought that he had a prominent role in what was going on in the WWF side of things, the Attitude Era, and the influx of excitement and ratings that they've gotten on the WWF side, and they thought that it was a really big coup. And we'll get into it here. I guess I could just kind of get it out of the way here now. Kind of like Eric Bischoff, I'm not a hater of Vince Russo. So if you're here looking for Russo hate or shitting on Russo or anything like that, it's not going to be that from me. Because I appreciate the contributions and the positivity that he brought in, and I almost again like with Bischoff, one of the constants that you see in every documentary, every interview, podcast, whatever, with Russo is that yes, there's a lot of negatives, but there's a good amount of positives and pros as well. And one of them is that he paid attention to a lot of the guys who were on the under and the mid card. You know what I mean? Goldust being one of them. For whatever reason, that's always one that stood out to me. And he just really put in time and effort and attention to characters and to other other people and other talent on the card who were not The Rocks, who were not Stone Colds, who were not Shawn Michaels, you know, and things of that nature, The Undertakers, who weren't in the prime focus. And yeah, like in a lot of ways, I get it. You know, like if you're a Vince McMahon, like your number one focus is going to be on your prime moneymaker, but you can't have a prime moneymaker without a supporting cast and without a foundation and without a card. You know, like yeah, you can. I'm sure people would go out there to if you were just promoting one show with one match. I'm sure it would get some hype, but that's even with the UFC, right? Like that's not how it goes. Like yes, the UFC, they build and hype their cards off of a main event and the main match and the main attraction, but they don't sell just one fight or just one matchup on their card. They have a lot of times they even have a pre-show as well. I'm pretty certain. You know, I'm not 100% on the pre-show, but I think they still do. But they absolutely have a card leading up to the main event. You don't just go straight to 11 o'clock having your main event. So I always appreciated that with Russo. I think the bro is just fucking ridiculous, and it cracks me up every time. But that's him, dude. Like that, I prime example there. Like I say, dude a lot. You know, like I have my words that I just beat to death. You know what I mean? But yeah, like I just want to get out of the way. Like, and obviously, like, did he hit home runs and everything? No, but I think he gets a lot of shit for stuff that it's just easy to shit on someone. You know what I mean? And if one person's doing it, to just pile on. So I'm the type where like, yeah, like I'll say if shit's bad, but like I'm not gonna sit here and just be like, oh, everything he did was shitty and it sucks. You know, so that's just kind of my 2 cents of it, and kind of where I'm coming from mindset wise. So just to kind of get that out there as well, and I guess to let you know if you were looking forward to that, that's just not where I'm coming from. But moving on to the program and Russo itself and himself, it starts in 1992 and kind of gives you a background on Russo, which again I really enjoy and I like there. It starts off by saying Russo says he has a degree in journalism and started writing a few articles for the WWF magazine. He would sit in while they were writing TV, and he said it was so bad he started writing his own angles in the magazine that had nothing to do with the TV show, which again has been consistent with previous interviews, and no one's ever disputed that. He stated that McMahon called him up to his office at 9 a.m. one day and told him that he wanted his TV to be like the Raw magazine, and that Russo had been writing rather. Russo notes that or I'm sorry, I skipped a line. Now we get mention. Okay, yeah. Now we get mention of Ed Ferrara, who Russo notes was a legit television writer, and again, that was playing into the previous mindset that Eric Bischoff had, which again, you would think that Eric Bischoff and Vince would Russo, um, would maybe relate a little bit better or have like like they would get along a little bit better because Vince Russo was kind of in the mindset of viewing wrestling as a television product as well, like Eric Bischoff was, and that was the whole key in the mindset of the shift for WCW that Eric Bischoff started and really kind of was his blueprint when he started and he took over, you know? So the fact that they had a similar mindset in that regard just makes it even more unfortunate that they couldn't just put their minds together for good. You know what I mean? So yeah, it just sucks. And what could have been is just always a wonder of mine too in that regard. But Russo notes that WCW was doing real life things and well maybe not real life things, but real angles and things that were more realistic. Whereas WC or WWF at the time is still in the cartoonish type realm. And having people jump out of eggs and shit like that. He said he was influenced by what WCW was doing at the time and talks about how the fans were switching between the shows. And he said the idea was you could not give the fans the chance to change the channel or they might not come back. And say that 5 times fast. But that's very true. You know what I mean? Even to this day, you know, once you get locked onto something, unless it's completely boring, a lot of times you just leave it on that channel and you divert your attention. You check out your phone or maybe even get up, walk in the other room, and it's just left on. Back in the day, you were more inclined to change the channel because we didn't have or anything that readily available to us. So we were more inclined to switch and to go back and forth. And the key was to, within that 30 seconds to maybe a minute or two where you're switching the channel and you're seeing what's going on the other station, that's the time where they need to grab you. So that was his mindset. He was going into, and kind of where that Crash TV mindset comes in, that he kind of gets some shit for it too, and throwing things on the wall and seeing what sticks. Like that's kind of, if I were to make an interpretation, where the mindset was coming from. Like, yeah, like if I'm just like if I'm turning the channel, right? If it's whatever random time, like 8:18, and I'm switching from Raw to WCW or WCW to Raw, and whatever is going on that other channel that I'm switching to, like that's kind of like their first impression in a lot of ways to me. It's okay, what's going on here? Is it cool? Is it grabbing my attention? Am I gonna put the remote down, or I'm gonna be like, all right, whatever, I'm just gonna go back. So again, I get the mindset behind it. Is it good for long term booking and character building and things like that? Probably not, but I respect the mindset behind it too. In a lot of ways, is where I'm coming from. But going back to Vince Russo, he was the head writer during the Attitude Era when the WWF was making all the money. SmackDown was introduced, and Russo couldn't write for another show, and he was getting burned out and never saw his kids. He also mentioned that he was never that his pay wasn't increased or doubled either, which I found interesting. It just sucks too, Like I don't know how corporations in general, that happens everywhere, damn near. Um, they get a new idea, they get a new product, they want to add it to the lineup, and here you go. But you don't get, oh, well, here's another increase to your pay or anything like that. It's just like, here you go, figure it out type shit. So I feel him there. McMahon expected Russo and Ed Ferrara to write another show. Oh, okay, and never offered any additional money. Then that's where we got our first bro on the bro meter. Russo started wondering if McMahon even cared about him as much as he cared for McMahon, or was he just the cash cow writing for his show? He broke down and cried at McMahon's office one day and he said he called his WCW connection. Rock notes that Russo did what was best for his family and was given control in WCW. Um, yeah, they didn't get too in depth on the back and forth Russo said that he had. He said that he had spoken with McMahon once he got an offer from WCW. I heard somewhere else back in the day, and that he was really torn. And Vince McMahon had told him at one point just to hire a nanny. Again, I'm not sure if that's true, but that's what Russo had stated in another interview somewhere. So I get it. If the main thing was the scheduling too, and it's just an accumulation of things, or and that was just kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back type thing. I get it. You know what I mean? But it's just still very interesting, all the what ifs when looking back. But moving on, yeah, here we go. Russo looked at WCW as a great challenge, and he saw a new breed, new blood, that was stuck in the middle and couldn't break the establishment. He arrived, and all the mid card talent like Malenko, Benoit, Conan, etc., coming up to him. Oh, okay. He arrived and all the mid-card talent started coming up to him, essentially. Booker T noticed and puts over the fact that the young talent and Brass agreed there were more talent than people knew. I'm not really sure what that sentence means, to be honest with you. I guess, I remember what they were saying in the show, though. Essentially, what Booker was saying was that they had an influx of talent, and they pretty much had more. They had more talent than they knew what to do with, essentially. And that's why, again, someone like a Russo coming in, it was a, and on paper, like a great addition and something that you really be looking forward to, and something that would make sense. But unfortunately, it just didn't seem to play out that way. Russo recalls looking at Hulk Hogan for the first time, and he just knew Hogan did not trust him. There was there's a little typo that says "trush" and it tickles me. He knew Hogan would not believe a word he said, and knew Bischoff was responsible for a little bit of it. He says, "I'm partially responsible for costing Eric his job." Um, okay. Kevin Nash, who was stoned apparently, says he always liked Russo, but told him he wasn't in Kansas anymore. He would know as shout out to Robert Leidy for this. He says he would know as he was Oz, so shout out there. Um, Russo says he had a great plan, and if we could go back and watch the first 3 months, we will see it. He always had Jerry Springer on his mind because it was so hot, and that is what he wanted to do with WCW. The wrestlers know it was a shift as the show is now louder and faster. Russo knows the numbers as they are out for anyone to see. If they went up in his, oh, okay, he pretty much saying that Russo knows what the numbers were and that they were out there in public record for anyone to go pretty much like fact check and see. The author says he checked, and Russo's first Nitro in charge was 10/18/99, and it looks like the ratings were the same, with some up and down over those 3 months. He does note it was a slight change, but they went up. So nice. Shout out to you again there, Robert. He took WCW in a direction that the suits did not like. Siegel says it had a slightly positive effect on the ratings, but not enough that they surely weren't advertiser friendly anymore. So pretty much not enough to outweigh the negative connotation that they're losing a lot of advertiser dollars and sponsorships, things like that. Russo says his job was to make the show the best he thought it could be. He wanted to do an appeal, or he wanted to appeal to an entire wrestling audience. Conan notes Russo wanted to give the fans who weren't watching wrestling and Jobs a Bro. Um, he wanted to get okay. So Conan was noting that Russo was out to attract the pretty much the non-wrestling fans, or maybe the Labs fans, just the people who weren't watching. He was out there, and that was his focal point, and that like his focus study, pretty much to try to go out there and get those people and bring them in. He says, or he buries the Judy Bagwell in a pole match and the Pinata in a pole match. And Booker thinks Russo was just trying to entertain himself. I don't know. I think Judy Bagwell in a pole match was prime TV. How can you not? All right. Bret Hart calls Russo an idiot, and Goldberg is a little bit more direct and calls Russo a shit stain. So they agree there, which seems to be a first. On something that Bret and Goldberg agree on. He feels that Russo was there to kill WCW and see seven staring. I'm not sure what that sentence means. But pretty much recapping that, I'm not really sure what that sentence means. So Goldberg was pretty much saying that he thinks that Russo was sent there and pretty much went there to kill WCW off, which I don't really think that makes sense, but whatever. The executives talk about how Russo no longer had McMahon as a buffer. Russo says he noticed that J.J. Dillon and Kevin Sullivan were having meetings and running to the office. Bill Bush told Russo they wanted him to work with the committee and told Bill his contract made him head of creative and he didn't want anything to do with the committee. He was going home and they could figure out how they could pay him. So essentially, Vince Russo wanted to have full creative control, and he was saying that's what his contract stated and indicated, and that J.J. Dillon and Kevin Sullivan were running back to the office and to the bosses, right, and having meetings and saying that it wasn't working out and that they needed to work as a team and whatever. And pretty much Russo was like, "Fuck that, I'm going home, and you can figure out how to pay me." um, so yeah, like it's just high school, you know what I mean? It's just high school shit at that point. It's just like why no one is looking at the bigger picture, and it's just really unfortunate. And I mean, at this point, especially for talent behind the scenes, like it's probably grinding on the wall, but it's something that you don't really want to acknowledge, you know, and you don't want to really believe that's happening. And it's just sad. It's just sad. Kevin Sullivan took over, and his first thing was to get back to wrestling. Russo says that Kevin Sullivan took over for Russo when he left. Russo says that when Benoit, Malenko, Saturn, and Eddie Guerrero saw he wasn't there anymore, they went ballistic as they knew what that meant for their careers. Sullivan says they were a big part of the show, but they weren't Hall, Nash, Hogan, or Savage. And I think that's wrong with the mindset there as well. Again, it's obvious, right? Like that's a no-brainer. Yes, they're not Hall, Nash, Hogan, or Savage, name brand wise, but there's a core that you need for your show still. And again, I'm not going to sit here and act like I know everything. I know how to write a show. Clearly, I don't. Clearly, I'm sitting here for a reason, right? But just kind of common sense tells you, like, yeah, totally, like they aren't that. But how did Hall, Nash, Hogan, or Savage get to that point over time? Over being at the bottom of the card, being the middle of the card, being the supporting act, being the backbone of the card until you get to that point. Yes, obviously some of them had different paths, but none of those guys were born overnight either, you know? So, especially Kevin Nash, like we just at the beginning of the series here, we went over all the different variations he had. He was fucking Oz, you know what I mean? Like, so to sit there and say, like, yeah, like Benoit, Malenko, Saturn, and Guerrero, they weren't Hall, Nash, Hogan, or Savage. Absolutely. However, you weren't even giving them an opportunity to get there. You know what I mean? And the focus there needed to be on that. And again, that wasn't going to save the show at this point, but it was just another example, in my opinion, that didn't help the mindset and the long term and the longevity, really, of the show and the long-term idea and the long-term booking of the show, rather. Like, it's just, to me, and that's what's frustrating in a lot of ways with wrestling today as a whole. Yes, we've gotten a lot better with it, but there's still a lot of things that we could get better at. But anyway, that's just kind of a little side tangent there. But Russo brings up that Sullivan throwing the group a bone when he made it didn't work as the group asked for their release, and Bill Bush said, um, he said, "I'm sure that won't backfire at all." I'm not sure if that was the author here, or I don't remember that comment on the show, so not sure who said that there. But yeah, yeah, I love the sarcasm there, because yeah, it clearly backfired. We get Eric Bischoff back into the vibe here. He's recalls sitting in a restaurant with his wife, and Raw was on his screen, and he saw Dean, Eddie, Saturn, and Benoit on the show, and that's when he knew WCW had hit rock bottom. And he said that he pretty much was just anticipating, and he even told his wife that he was just waiting for a call to come back at that point. Back to Raw in Pittsburgh, where the Radicals debuted 15 days after Chris Benoit had won the WCW title, which is just fucking crazy to think about timeline wise. Like, just 2 weeks and a day later, your former WCW champion is debuting on pretty much your competition, not even pretty much your competition. Which is just wild. DDT, DDT, DDP, and Booker T say it was a big move. Conan says the office screwed up as they felt they didn't need the guys. And again, kind of what I was referencing prior. Russo says the ratings plummeted after he left and WCW hit rock bottom. And the author says, yeah, no, they weren't there quite yet, but they were stumbling down that hill. Siegel notes that all the decisions were made by him, and someone suggested bringing Eric back. He says his relationship with Eric was always good, and he felt bringing him back as a consultant was a good idea. Bischoff told Brad he would come back, but not as an employee because things were crazier now. He said he would just report back to Brad and nobody else. That accepted. Pretty much the terms were accepted, and they asked Bischoff if he wanted to meet, or if he would meet with Russo rather, to see if they could work together. Russo said, "I never thought it could work," which, there we go. He says Brad never told him that Eric was his boss or had the final say. Eric says he was hired to oversee Russo in the creative process. Siegel says his memory was sketchy, but if Eric came back, he had to approve it. So again, just simple shit right there. Like, that shouldn't even be a question. It shouldn't be a question of who's over who. Is Russo reporting to Bischoff? Is Bischoff overseeing Russo? Are they on the level playing field, and one is not even necessarily directly reporting to the other? That shouldn't even be something that Bischoff and Russo were trying to figure out. That should have been something that Eric's bosses and the top executives were like, yo, this is what it is. Bischoff is reporting to Russo. Russo is reporting to Bischoff, vice versa. And for whatever reason, that's not clear. And it's just something that seems so simple to me. Like, why wouldn't you want your hierarchy in your pecking order to be clear? I just don't know that. And if it is, and we're just getting conflicting stories, and it is what it is. But that's something that we've heard multiple times before in the past too. And it's just always stood out to me. Like, why is that a question? Eric says that Russo was a charming guy, and he figured he could make it work. So pretty much Eric was saying that he was trying to make it work, and Russo, why do I keep saying Russo? Russo prior had said that he never thought it could work. So we see, kind of like the mindset there. There was a big reboot on Nitro where Russo and Eric hugged, and Eric said things were worse when he got back than probably what he originally thought. And then they show the clip where yeah, so they show the infamous moment where the blood was supposed to fall on Kevin Nash in the center of the ring for the new blood, and they missed, which was classic. Nash says to take that clip and show it after the finger poke of doom, and to tell him what really killed WCW. You can just see how pissed Nash was. Eric said there was no hope. It is quite funny. Like, Nash is standing pretty much dead center in the ring, like over top of the logo, and the blood drops. Like, I think it's like if he's standing there, I think it was to his left. It's just like, it pretty much just symbolizes everything there. I don't think that's worse than the finger poke of doom, though. I still think that is an atrocity, and there's no excusing that. And that's just a slap in the face. Like, No excuse for that shit. No, oh, well, the file was supposed to be. No, no, bro, not with the players involved, not with the title on the line. Like, no, like that's just it's absurd. So why this is just like embarrassing, the finger poke of doom is just shameful, in my opinion. And again, no shots to like anyone specifically, but like as a whole, like that was just trash. It was a trash finish and a trash idea. Um, Eric Bischoff discusses the plan of the Millionaires Club versus the New Blood, young versus old mindset. Russo notes that that was inspired by things that had been going on in the wrestling business since day one. The young up and comer Shane Shane Douglas cutting shoot promos on Hulk Hogan. DDP says they are making money because they earned their spot. So pretty much going back and forth between should they be spotlighting the younger talent or should the older talent, the established talent, continue to remain in the main event? And it should be a mixture. Simple. It should be a mixture. And it depends on who it is, really. Like it sucks, but yeah, like a lot of times it does depend on who it is, but even your biggest stars shouldn't be occupying the majority of the show. Yes, they should be in maybe they should be in the majority of the segments, but they shouldn't always be the beneficiary. They shouldn't always be the focal point. Like they can be involved, but it shouldn't always be about them, in my opinion, if that makes sense. And then Booker T brings up the promo where Hogan actually specifically says, where he mentioned that he was getting older, but so was everyone else in the back. And Booker T says he gets it, but he wanted his work to get him ahead and not his politics. So shout out to you, Book. Russo knew there would be politics, but not to the extent that he had witnessed, bro. He still wanted to do all he could to bring the ratings up. They discussed the Ready to Rumble movie and the whole debacle that was David Arquette winning the title, which again is just fucking shameful. Um, David Arquette is here, which again another good coup, and says he never wanted to be a wrestler except when he was a kid. The plan was to tie the movie into what was really happening with Nitro. They pitched the idea of a tag match with Bischoff and Jeff Jarrett facing DDP and David Arquette. The meeting went fine, and Russo was there by himself when Tony Schiavone came to him. Which again, I fucking love Tony Schiavone, but this is not great. Tony Schiavone, it seems, was the one who pitched the idea of Arquette winning the WCW title. And the author said there she can either blame or applaud, depending on your opinion of Arquette winning the championship. Russo brought everyone back in for the meeting, and he says 100% of the people agreed with Tony Schiavone's idea with Arquette winning the championship. Eric isn't sure how the idea generated and says it was an elaborate way to promote the movie itself, which is not what you should be focusing on at all. He didn't seem the harm in it, which again is a problem. DDP, on the other hand, laughed out loud and thought it was a joke. He told him it was a terrible idea, and Arquette agreed with him. You can't do that. So even fucking David Arquette didn't want to win the title. Back to Thunder, where WCW, where David Arquette pins Eric Bischoff in a tag match and becomes WCW World Champion, because that makes fucking sense. Like, and like, I try to defend and like I'm not a Bischoff hater, but like that's just trash. Like you're involved in the match, dude. Like how do you allow that to happen? Like you can't say you're just going along with it because like you're involved in the match. Like come on. No reason he should win the championship at all. There was a little bit of backlash from the fans and the boys in the back. I don't know about a little bit. Arquette brings up being in the back and being in shock, but excited, and asks Booker how many times he had been champion, which is just fucking like a slap in the face because at that point Booker had never been champion. Then that's when he realized, he being David Arquette, that he was like, oh shit, like I really should not be champion, and this needs to change. People were pissed an actor had won the world title. Russo told them guys, just a typo. It gets eyes pretty much essentially on the product, and Cunha says it was wrong for many reasons. Excuse me. Russo brings up Arquette being on the front cover of USA Today, and that would have never happened in a million years. He says he is writing a television show, and that's what they needed, which, again, like I get it, but no. Eric Bischoff notes the wrestling audience didn't appreciate it, and it really was the hardcore fans who he was really, I don't understand that sentence either. Eric Bischoff, again, was looking at the bigger picture and felt that they could handle a few weeks of bad press. He says it didn't stop, and it participated in it, so he has to take the blame as well. So pretty much, I guess what they're saying, it's very just confusing wording. So long story short, essentially what they're saying is Eric didn't stop it. He didn't advocate for it. It wasn't his idea, but he didn't actively try to stop it. So he's kind of guilty for being involved. So it is what it is. They show Arquette cutting the promo where he wants to give it the belt, and someone like Booker T deserves it. Booker says that David was his biggest cheerleader, so good on David. And again, props to David Arquette for that, and always being real in that regard. Booker T says he started at the bottom of the company and was doing something he never dreamed of in a million years. They took Booker and made him G.I. Joe Bro again at one point. He says he was just doing what he was needed to do and what they asked at first, and figured hard work would get him where he needed to be. He does say that the goal of being world champion seems so far off because he was African American. Russo puts over Booker huge and says everyone loved Booker. He talks about everyone pretty much gunning for the person on the way up, and Hogan did everything he could to protect his spot at the top. So there's that. We jump back to Halloween Havoc 1999, where Hulk Hogan laid down for Sting in the middle of the ring and went home as he didn't want to work with Russo. Which, again, this is another shit show moment. Eric gets brought back, and that also brings Hogan back. Russo was tired of dealing with Eric and told Brad that if he wanted Eric to be head of creative, that would be fine. Brad told Russo he was in charge of creative still, and that was 2 days before Bash at the Beach 2000. They had a Dark Side of the Ring episode on that show, a report rather, which you can check out from 411 Mania. And we'll be moving on to Bash at the Beach itself now. Bash to the Beach 2000. Yeah, if you haven't seen that, it's a shit show as well. Eric says this was the culmination of all the issues pretty much this is the culmination of all the issues were at this show. Russo says that if there was no Eric, he thinks he and Hogan would have worked well together and that there would have never been any issues at all. So Eric Bischoff is the problem, according to Russo. Eric says that Hogan had creative control and the two of them were on the same page. He knows Hogan having creative control was at the end of any dispute. So at the end of the day, it didn't matter because Hogan had creative control and Hogan was going to do what Hogan wanted to do. That's where that doesn't work for me, brother shit comes from. The agreed to plan was Hogan was leaving with the belt, but Russo jumped in after Hogan and Bischoff left and went into business for himself, which is Eric Bischoff's side of the story. Russo then cuts a shoot promo where he buries Hulk Hogan. Sharmell had no idea what was happening and asked the others in the back if this was part of the show. Russo says it was a work and everyone was in on it, but he was really that pissed off. Conan claims that was Russo shooting, and Booker felt it was as real as it could possibly be. Russo says the point of the promo was to not run Hogan down, which, come on now, come on. Instead, it was a way to get Booker into the main event and have it make sense. Booker says he found out 10 minutes before Russo announced it, and he was ready to become the world champion. So yeah, Booker found out 10 minutes before that show was going to happen. And they aired a promo that Booker T did, which was just very well done. It's underrated, too. Back to the Bash at the Beach, with Booker T beating Jeff Jarrett to become the WCW World Champion for the very first time. Booker says it took someone like Russo to get that done for him, and that, pretty much he, it's kind of not indebted, but he props and gives a shout out to Russo for that. But he was very far out of loop as far as what was happening with Russo, Bischoff, and Hogan. Russo says everyone online bought the story hook, line, and sinker. Everyone was happy to see someone put Hogan in his place. Russo says this angered Hogan in his ego. And then they go back to when Eric says back to Eric, who says his phone and Hogan's phone were blowing up with people telling him what happened. Eric notes again that contractually Hogan had creative control, and this is not what they had agreed to. He knew Hogan was done, and there was a lawsuit that was going to be coming. They just referenced Guy Evans talking about the fans, how they should be the most important. Just talk about creative changes again. But essentially at the end of the story, or long story short, rather, with the whole Hogan, Bischoff, Russo part of the deal, it sucks, but Hogan did have creative control. So, doesn't make it right, doesn't make me a fan of it, but whoever allowed that to be in his contract, that is what it is. Like, so if the three of them agreed to something, and then once Bischoff and Hogan left and Russo did something different, then yeah, like it is a violation. In my understanding, like just taking it black and white, like yeah, my understanding that that's what it would be. So again, like I don't agree with giving anyone creative control like that, but if you did, then and that's never been disputed, and that's actually been highly, confirmed, there's only so much you can do. So it sucks, but you can't agree and then go back and change it when the person's not there. Um, but next week we get the final episode, episode 4, the end of WCW, which is sad. I've been really enjoying the docu-series. I'm excited to see what the 4th episode has, what it's going to entail, how they're going to format it and lay it out. They did in this episode 3 though, with Russo being involved and putting the title on himself, which again is a fucking joke and shameful. Shame. Like, I don't know, like, and again, that's where a lot of people shit on him, and I see it, like I can't dispute that, you know what I mean? I can't give credit to that. He says he never thought he was a wrestler and uses the excuse that it was a television show, so that's what he was doing to try to gain ratings. He has an axe to grind with Goldberg and says he hurt him on purpose with a spear. Russo had a concussion and told Goldberg to make sure he speared him into the entranceway, but the spear happens and Russo crashes into the railing. Again, if you look at the clip though, like with where Russo was standing, I agree with the author here. Like you can't really blame Goldberg there, but it just should have never happened to begin with in the beginning. Long story short, like should have never been out there. Should have never been in that situation. You're not a wrestler, bro. Like you're a writer. Like just like I'm not a storyline writer. I'm just someone who sits here and gives my opinion. Like if I don't know how to do something, I don't go out there and do it. You know what I mean? Like I don't, without training, without proper practice, and I don't put the title on myself. Like that's just a joke. You know what I mean? Like that is the side of the Russo disdain and the criticism that I get. I don't disdain him. I don't know him. I don't know him to disdain him, right? But that's if we were making like a pro and con like of like his career work, then I'd be like, yeah, that's not a good choice, bro. You know what I mean? So, and it's unfortunate because like I said earlier, what it could have been is something that we'll never know, and it's unfortunate because I think there Bischoff and Russo's vision could have been. I think it could have been. I think they could have had more similarities than not. You know what I mean? And I think that if they weren't so headstrong and so similar in a lot of ways, with being so results driven and so headstrong with their own vision, I think it could have worked. But being who they are individually, it's just you needed that buffer and you needed that almost, I'm not going to say it, but you needed that buffer, and they didn't have it there. So that it was kind of destined to be. um but with that being said, we are moving, like I said, forward to episode 4. I'm very bummed by that because I've enjoyed this series very, very much so, and I've enjoyed sitting here getting to chat about it. Like I said earlier at the beginning of the show, thank you guys so much for checking it out and for watching along here. Drop any comments in the comment section on YouTube or anywhere else that you're listening. I appreciate you guys. Feel free to like the channel on YouTube if you have, or like the episode, or subscribe, all that good stuff. Follow on Twitter at @KickAssPodcast_ and me at ASHMANNS. But until next time, guys, thank you so much and be safe and enjoy wrestling.